The next team I'd like to introduce is Brighten and Ashish. Brighten and Ashish come from the University of Illinois, and they're going to show us some work they're doing in Pathlet routing. Now, Pathlet routing is a non-IP based routing strategy that seeks to bring control over packet routes directly to the source. You'll pardon me for a voting analogy, but we are in our nation's capital the day after Election Day. This gives the users of the network the chance to vote with their traffic for their favorite paths, for whatever reason might motivate them. Brighten, Ashish?
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so this project is exploring how to build fundamentally more flexible routing architectures. And the problem we're addressing is in the current internet, routing is relatively inflexible. And this leads to a number of problems. By picking routes only within the network, generally in a hop-by-hop manner, exposing only one path, there's a single offered path to each destination that might be easily broken, congested, or insecure. Since the network, while it can react at global scales, often reacts slowly on the order of minutes or longer, may not automatically react to congestion, and some of the route selection rules can be exploited in traffic attraction attacks. Now, the general approach that we're exploring to address these problems is that of source-controlled routing. So the idea is, rather than embedding routing decisions within the network, separate that out. Make routing a parameter to the network at some level of granularity, so that a packet's path is specified within the packet header. And then sources, or perhaps the first router acting on their behalf, can select for each packet which path they would like it to take. Now, what can you do this? Well, one thing is that you can switch routes quickly in response to failures or other dynamics in the network. So just based on end-to-end observations about what's actually happening on the path and what actually matters to that particular application, you can, within a matter of seconds rather than minutes or longer, switch to a better route. You can use multiple routes simultaneously for critical traffic. You can achieve a better load balance since paths are selected on a much finer granularity. And it also makes traffic attraction attacks harder since routes can be based on observed performance. Now, this is a major shift in the routing ecosystem of the internet. And so a big question is a balance of control. Okay? If you have some sort of source-controlled routing or edge-controlled routing, what is the balance between control by the users versus control by the owners of the networks? And that's a question that the Pathlet routing architecture is addressing. And the idea is essentially not to make any fixed decision in the architecture, but rather provide a flexible architecture which can have many outcomes. On one extreme, looking essentially like BGP today. On the other extreme, full source-controlled routing, and many points in between on that spectrum. So the idea of the architecture is source routing within a virtual topology. What does that mean? Well, the owners of networks will create and advertise virtual nodes and virtual edges that we call pathlets because they're fragments of an end-to-end path. And it turns out that these virtual nodes and edges are a convenient way to express many different kinds of policies. Now, within these policy-compliant services that are being advertised by the networks, users can then pick any sequence of pathlets, stitch them together to form a full end-to-end path. Architecturally speaking, we also think that this is provides a nice kind of modularity across networks. Networks can create and advertise new types of services, new types of pathlets, without coordinating with other networks to get them to be used. Now, this architecture, although I haven't gone into the details, addresses big challenges in policy and scalability. Another challenge for any source-controlled or multipath routing architecture is, OK, you have now given all of this flexibility to the network edges. How do they actually use it? How do you dynamically select paths, given the complicated nature of the internet, to get high-quality, efficient paths with little overhead? And this is something that we're exploring by building on Genie's Proto-Genie, OpenFlow, and PlanetLab resources, and it was what Ashish was about to demo for you.
Today we'll be demonstrating two techniques that use source routing to improve network reliability. We'll be showing you these techniques in the context of a video streaming application that we have deployed on a Genie slice. We have a video server on a Proto-Genie host at the GPO, a video client at Stanford on a PlanetLab host, and the video traffic is being sent along an OpenFlow network with intermediate hops at Indiana, Georgia Tech, and Clemson. This OpenFlow network implements the Pathlet routing architecture, which means the source is allowed to control the path that its packets are sent along. In our implementation, this choice of path is handled by an agent running at the source that periodically routes round-trip probes along each of the paths in the network and uses these probes to measure the latency and loss rate on each path. And it ensures that the video traffic is always sent along the best of the available paths. Now, if there is some sort of network event, such as congestion or a failure on one of the links, this path selection agent can detect this and switch paths quickly in response in a couple of seconds. But for many kinds of failures, the internet could take anything from minutes to hours to recover from a failure, if it does recover at all. And this difference is what we'll be showing you today. We have two video streams. The one on the left is being sent along a path controlled by the path selection agent. The one on the right is being sent along a fixed path, the one through Indiana, which simulates what the internet would do. Now, now we'll simulate a link failure on the Indiana path. What you'll see is that both these videos will stop, but the one on the left will continue. It's already continuing. Will continue after a short blip as the path selection agent detects and routes around this failure. This is good, but it turns out you can do even better if you're allowed to use extra bandwidth. We now have a similar setup to what we had in the previous slide, in the previous demo. But now the path selection agent is sending out 2 copies of each packet, one along each of the paths in the network. So now we'll do what we did in the last slide. We will simulate a failure on the Indiana path. The video on right will stop, but the video on the left will continue without even the small blip you saw in the previous slide. So if you have a critical latency sensitive application, you can provide it stronger performance and reliability guarantees at the expense of added bandwidth usage. What we just showed you was our basic functionality running in a very restricted environment. Now, in order to quantify exactly how well these techniques work in a real network, in a real large-scale network with messy traffic patterns, we have been running experiments on 2 deployments. One deployment is an overlay deployment on PlanetLab, and the other is an in-network deployment on the Genie OpenFlow network. And what we're showing here are some results from our PlanetLab deployment. In the chart on the x-axis, we have latency thresholds in seconds. And on the y-axis, you have the fraction of packets that take longer than a certain threshold to get to the destination. These results are for both network failures and network congestion. And these are for just network congestion. And the results show that intelligent path selection can give you a significant improvement in latency over the internet. And that if you're allowed to use extra bandwidth, you can come surprisingly close to the theoretically achievable level of performance. These experiments were on overlay networks, which is great. It allowed us to test our ideas at scale. But the problem with experimenting on an overlay network is that running on an overlay can affect path characteristics such as latency and loss rate. And the key feature that Genie provides us is the ability to implement the functionality that we require at a very deep level within the network stack as a non-IP architecture. This should allow us to run more realistic experiments. Now, what we just showed you, what we are showing you, is a demonstration of a prototype of our basic functionality running on an OpenFlow deployment. What is left is to run experiments and get some data. And a large in-network deployment should also allow us to answer many interesting questions. Is it really possible to quickly react to network dynamics in a large network with realistic traffic patterns? And what happens when you have multiple senders competing with each other, each trying to selfishly optimize their own path choice? Does congestion become a serious issue? And how do in-network and overlay deployments compare to each other? And we believe the answer to this last question should be of broader interest outside of the specific routing context that we are interested in. So we're glad to be a part of this effort, and we're excited about the future. Thank you.